I got back to Anchorage 11 days before my contract ended. The fishing vessel had taken on water near Kodiak Island, and the captain made the call to limp back to port for repairs. 8 months working the Bering Sea crab boats, and all I could think about on that long ride in was my son. Maybe Tyler would be at the kitchen table doing homework. Maybe Karen would have dinner going. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. I wanted to surprise them. The apartment smelled wrong when I opened the door. Not bad, just empty. Like nobody had been cooking or living in it for a while. Karen's shoes were by the door, but the place had that hollow feeling you get in a house where a kid doesn't live anymore. Tyler's room stopped me cold. The bed was stripped down to the mattress. His bookshelf was half empty. The model airplanes he'd been building since he was 6, the ones he hung from the ceiling with fishing line, were gone. Every single one. I stood there trying to make sense of it. My boy was 10 years old and obsessed with aviation. He'd told me on our last satellite call that he was building a B-17 Flying Fortress. Said it had over 200 pieces, and he was saving the decals for when I got home so we could do them together. The decals were in the trash can. I fished them out, still in the packaging, never opened. Karen. I found her in the bedroom watching something on her phone with the volume low. She jumped when she saw me. "James, what are you doing here?" Boat came back early. "Where's Tyler?" She set the phone down carefully. "He's at a program, a residential program for kids with behavioral challenges. Dr. Whitfield runs it. Mountain Ridge Academy, up near Talkeetna. I told you about it. You didn't tell me anything about sending my son to a residential program. I told you he was struggling. You said handle it. I said help him with his homework. I said maybe get him a tutor. I didn't say ship him off to some place I've never heard of. It's not shipping him off. Dr. Whitfield is a child psychologist. He specializes in boys who are acting out. Tyler was getting into fights at school, refusing to do his work, throwing tantrums. The school threatened suspension. I needed help, James. You were on a boat in the middle of the ocean. What was I supposed to do?" "When did he leave?" 6 weeks ago. My legs felt unsteady. 6 weeks. My son had been gone for 6 weeks and nobody told me. I called you every Sunday, Karen. You never once mentioned he wasn't here. Because you would have reacted exactly like this. Doctor. Whitfield said parental interference during the adjustment period undermines the whole process. Tyler needed time to settle in without you trying to rescue him. Give me the address. James, please, just give me 1 more week. He's making real progress. Dr. Whitfield says he's finally learning accountability. The address, Karen. She gave it to me like she was handing over something fragile. Mountain Ridge Academy. Mile marker 114 on the Parks Highway. Then 12 miles east on a logging road. She said I'd need 4-wheel drive for the last stretch. James, don't go up there making trouble. This program cost $4,000. I already paid half. That money could have paid for a real therapist. He is a real therapist, licensed and everything. I looked him up. I was already putting my boots back on. The drive from Anchorage to Talkeetna took about 2.5 hours. I pushed it. The Parks Highway ran north through spruce forest and river valleys, Denali hiding somewhere behind the clouds to the west. I tried calling Mountain Ridge Academy 3 times. No answer, no voicemail, just ringing. The turnoff at mile marker 114 was easy to miss. A wooden sign said Mountain Ridge Academy, authorized vehicles only. The logging road was dirt and gravel, rutted from spring thaw. My truck bounced through puddles that hadn't dried from the last rain. 12 miles of this. No cell signal after the first 2. The compound appeared in a clearing carved out of the spruce. 3 long wooden buildings that looked like military barracks. A larger building in the center with a metal roof. A barn. Behind it all, the Talkeetna Mountains rose up gray and enormous. No playground. No sports equipment. 2 ATVs parked near the barn and a cargo van with the Mountain Ridge logo on the side. It was late afternoon, maybe 4 o'clock, and the light was already going gold the way it does in Alaska in September. I heard chopping before I saw anyone. Rhythmic, steady, coming from behind the barn. I walked around the building and found them. 14 boys, ages maybe 8 to 13. They were splitting firewood, not with machines, with axes and mauls that looked too heavy for most of them. A man in an orange vest watched from a camp chair, thermos in one hand, walkie-talkie in the other. The boys worked in pairs. One held the round on the splitting block while the other swung. None of them were wearing gloves. Their hands were raw and blistered. Some had bandages wrapped around their palms that were brown with dirt. Tyler was at the far end. I almost didn't recognize him because he'd lost weight. Too much weight for 6 weeks. His hair was shaved close to his scalp. He was holding a log steady while a bigger boy swung a maul that could have taken his fingers off. My son was shaking, not from cold, because despite the September chill he was sweating through his shirt. He was shaking from fear. Every time the bigger boy raised the maul, Tyler flinched but held his position. Something broke loose inside my chest. I walked into that woodlot like I was walking onto the deck of a pitching boat in a storm. Deliberate, focused. Hey, the man in the orange vest stood up. This is a restricted area, sir. You need to. That's my son. Tyler heard my voice before he saw me. His head snapped around, and the expression on his face is something I will never be able to describe without my throat closing up. It was disbelief and hope and terror all at once, like he wanted to run to me but was afraid of what would happen if he did. Dad? He didn't move. He looked at the man in the orange vest first, like he was asking permission. That told me everything I needed to know. I'm right here, buddy. Come here. Tyler dropped the log. He took 2 steps, then stopped. Looked at the man again. The man in the vest shook his head slightly, almost imperceptible. But I saw it, and Tyler saw that I saw it. Then my son ran. He hit me full force and I caught him. His arms locked around my waist, and he pressed his face into my jacket, and I could feel every rib through his shirt. Dad, don't let them put me back in the box. Please. I'll be good. I won't build planes anymore. I promise. I won't waste time. Please don't let them put me back. What box? Tyler. What box? He was crying too hard to answer. The other boys had stopped working. They stood there holding axes and mauls, looking at us with expressions that ranged from blank to desperate. One kid, couldn't have been older than 8, had fresh bruises on both forearms. He was holding his maul with fingers that were swollen at the joints. Sir, you need to leave. The man in the orange vest was on his walkie-talkie now. We've got an unauthorized parent at the woodlot. Need Dr. Whitfield at Station 2. I picked Tyler up. He was 10 and too big for carrying, but he weighed maybe 65 pounds. That was wrong. He'd been 82 when I left. Where are their parents? I asked the man. These boys are enrolled in our program. Their parents signed consent forms. You're trespassing on private property and disrupting a therapeutic activity. This isn't therapy. This is a work camp. He smiled like I'd said something naive. Dr. Whitfield will explain. He'll be here in a moment. I started walking toward my truck. Tyler, still in my arms, whispered into my neck. Dad, there's more kids. In the barn, the ones who got in trouble. They locked them in stalls. I kept walking. A tall man in clean khakis and a pullover sweater was coming around the center building, moving fast but trying not to look like it. He had silver hair and glasses, and the kind of face you'd trust at a parent-teacher conference. Mr. Harlan. His voice was warm, practiced. I'm Dr. Whitfield. I understand you're concerned about Tyler. Let's go to my office and talk this through. I'm leaving with my son, I see. He adjusted his glasses. I know this looks alarming to someone who hasn't seen our methodology. Wilderness therapy can seem harsh to outsiders, but the physical challenges are carefully calibrated. The wood splitting, the hiking, the outdoor work, it builds resilience. Tyler has made tremendous progress. He was violent and defiant when he arrived. Now look at him. He's learning discipline. He's learning to be afraid, I said. He asked me not to put him back in a box. What is that? Tyler clung tighter. The reflection room, Dr. Whitfield said smoothly. A quiet, safe space where boys can process their emotions away from peer influence. It's a standard technique in wilderness therapy. How big is this reflection room? It's appropriate for the purpose. How big? Dr. Whitfield's expression shifted. Maybe an inch, but I caught it. Mr. Harlan, your wife signed a comprehensive enrollment agreement. Tyler is in our legal care for the duration of the 12-week program. Removing him without proper discharge procedures would create significant legal complications for you. Let me guess. You'll call the troopers. Doctor. Whitfield didn't answer that question. Instead, he said, I have excellent relationships with local law enforcement. Several officers have enrolled their own children in our program. I want to see where my son sleeps. That's not possible during program hours. The barracks are a controlled environment. I shifted Tyler to my left side and pulled out my phone. No signal. Dr. Whitfield noticed. We're in a communication-limited zone. It's part of the therapeutic design. Removing digital distractions helps these boys reconnect with themselves. It also means they can't call for help. 2 more men had appeared behind Dr. Whitfield. Both big, both wearing the same orange vests as the man at the woodlot. Staff members, I assumed. I didn't like the way they positioned themselves between me and the parking area. Tyler, I said quietly, is there a phone here anywhere? Dr. Whitfield's office, Tyler whispered. Landline. I looked at the 3 men blocking my path to the truck. Then I looked at the center building. The main door was 20 feet to my left. I ran. Not toward the truck, toward the building. I hit the front door with my shoulder. Tyler still on my left side. It wasn't locked. Inside was a reception area that looked surprisingly professional. Certificates on the wall, a mounted fish, leather chairs. A hallway led to offices. Dr. Whitfield's name was on the second door. Inside, a desk, a bookshelf, and a landline phone sitting right there. I set Tyler down and picked up the receiver. Dial tone. I called 911. Alaska State Troopers responded to calls in this area, the dispatcher said. She asked if anyone was in immediate danger. I told her I had 14 boys doing forced labor with no protective equipment, and my son telling me they lock children in boxes. She said troopers were being dispatched and to stay on the line. Dr. Whitfield appeared in the doorway. He was breathing hard, but his voice stayed calm. Mr. Harlan, you're making a very serious mistake. Those boys out there, I told the dispatcher. I need someone to check on them before these people move them. Dr. Whitfield stopped pretending to smile. He turned to one of the orange vest men behind him. Get the boys inside. Now. Start with Barracks 3. No. I stepped into the doorway with the phone. The dispatcher could hear everything. You're not moving those kids anywhere. Troopers are on their way. The next 40 minutes were the longest of my life. Dr. Whitfield tried 3 different approaches. First, he was reasonable, explaining this was a misunderstanding, that I was an absent father who didn't understand modern therapeutic techniques. Then he was threatening, talking about lawsuits and kidnapping charges and how my criminal record would look in a custody hearing. Then he was pleading, saying these boys needed him, that their parents had given up on them, that he was the only one who cared. Tyler sat under the desk the entire time. He wouldn't come out. He'd pulled his knees to his chest and put his hands over his ears. When I crouched down to check on him, he was reciting multiplication tables under his breath. Later, his therapist would tell me that was a dissociative coping mechanism. The program had used math drills as punishment, making boys stand and recite until they collapsed. So Tyler's brain had turned it into a shield. 2 trooper SUVs came up the logging road at 5:47 p.m. I know the exact time because I was watching the clock on Dr. Whitfield's desk, counting every minute. Trooper Reyes was the first one out. She was about 40, no nonsense, with the kind of eyes that cataloged everything they saw. She took one look at the boys' hands, at the axes, at the weight Tyler wasn't carrying on his frame, and her jaw tightened. I need to see all the facilities, she told Dr. Whitfield. Every building, of course, but many areas contain confidential therapeutic materials. I have probable cause, and I'm not asking. What they found in the barn took the investigation from a welfare check to a crime scene. 6 wooden stalls, originally built for horses, had been converted into isolation cells. Plywood walls, no windows, a bucket in each one. Scratch marks on the inside of the doors. 3 of the stalls had padlocks on the outside. One of them was occupied. A 12-year-old boy named Marcus had been in there for 2 days. His offense was crying during the morning hike. When they opened the door, he didn't react, just sat there staring at the wall. The paramedics who arrived an hour later said he was severely dehydrated and showing signs of acute psychological trauma. The barracks were almost as bad. Bunk beds with no mattresses, just sleeping bags on plywood. Temperatures in the barracks dropped below 40 degrees at night in September in Alaska. The boys had been given 1 wool blanket each. Food logs showed meals of oatmeal, canned beans, and bread. The same 3 items, rotated, for the entire 6 weeks Tyler had been there. Some of the boys had lost 15 pounds. But the thing that made Trooper Reyes radio for additional units was the financial records. Dr. Whitfield wasn't just charging parents $4,000 per child. He'd also been contracting the boys out to local properties for manual labor, firewood splitting, brush clearing, fence repair. He'd billed landowners $35 per boy per day. The money went into an account under a nonprofit called Northern Light Youth Services. Tax-exempt, 23 boys total, across 2 locations. The second site was 40 miles north, deeper in the backcountry. Troopers reached it by helicopter the next morning. Karen showed up around 9 p.m. Someone from the trooper's office had called her. She pulled into the compound in her sedan, still wearing her work clothes from the medical billing office. When she saw Tyler sitting in the back of my truck, wrapped in a trooper's jacket, eating a granola bar like he hadn't seen food in days, she started screaming. Not at me, not at anyone, just screaming. I didn't know, James. I swear I didn't know. I looked it up. He had a website. He had testimonials. Other parents said it changed their kids' lives. Did you visit? I asked. He said parents weren't allowed during the first 8 weeks. It was policy. And that didn't seem wrong to you? She didn't have an answer. Tyler wouldn't look at her. He just kept eating, slowly, methodically, like he was afraid someone might take the food away. At the hospital in Talkeetna, the doctor who examined Tyler listed the following: malnutrition with a 12-pound weight loss, blisters and lacerations on both hands, 2 infected, bruising on his forearms consistent with being grabbed, mild hypothermia indicators, and something the doctor called hypervigilance, a state where the body stays in permanent fight or flight mode. Tyler's resting heart rate was 112 beats per minute. A healthy 10-year-old should be around 80. He asked me twice if the food at the hospital was real, if they were going to take it back. He asked 3 times if the door was locked, not because he wanted it locked, but because he wanted to make sure he could open it. He slept for 14 hours. I sat in the chair beside his bed the entire time. The investigation lasted 5 months. I quit the crab boats, took a job at a welding shop in Wasilla, same as my training before I went to sea. Less money. Didn't matter. Tyler needed a parent who was present, not a paycheck that showed up while he fell apart. Dr. Whitfield's real name turned out to be Gerald Whitfield. He did have a psychology license, but it had been suspended 3 years earlier in Oregon for ethical violations involving a similar program. He'd moved to Alaska because licensing oversight was thinner and the wilderness made isolation easy. He'd set up Mountain Ridge Academy with a convincing website, fabricated testimonials, and a nonprofit shell that let him collect tax-deductible donations on top of parent fees and labor contracts. The trial started in March. Tyler testified by video from the therapist's office. He described mornings at 5 a.m., barefoot exercises in near-freezing temperatures that Dr. Whitfield called grounding rituals. He described the math drills, the food restrictions used as punishment, the reflection boxes in the barn. He described watching Marcus get dragged to the stall and hearing him screaming for 2 hours before it went quiet. His voice was steady through the whole thing except once. When the prosecutor asked Tyler what Dr. Whitfield told him about me, my son paused for a long time. Then he said, "He told me my dad chose the ocean over me, that I wasn't worth coming home for, that the only way I'd ever be worth anything was if I worked harder than everyone else. He said my dad knew about the program and approved it. He said my mom and my dad both agreed I needed to be fixed." I was in the courtroom when those words came through the speakers. I put my head in my hands and I felt something collapse inside me that I don't think will ever fully rebuild, because part of it was true. Not the cruelty, not the lies about approving the program, but the choosing. I had chosen the ocean over being present. I had left my son with a woman I'd only married 14 months before and told her to handle it. I'd taken the contract because the money was too good, told myself I was providing, told myself Tyler would be fine, and he almost wasn't. Gerald Whitfield was convicted on 23 counts of child abuse, 12 counts of unlawful imprisonment, fraud, and labor trafficking of minors. The judge gave him 55 years, no parole eligibility for 30. His staff, 7 people total across both sites, received sentences from 8 to 20 years. Karen wasn't charged criminally. The prosecutor determined she'd been deceived, like the other parents, but she was charged in family court. I filed for full custody the day after the arrest and received it 6 weeks later. Karen got supervised visitation. She didn't fight it. At the hearing, she told the judge she'd been so overwhelmed by Tyler's behavior problems that she'd believed anyone who offered a solution. She said she'd wanted to be a good stepmother so badly that she'd trusted a stranger over her own instincts. I believed her, which made it harder, not easier. Tyler's recovery was not linear. The first 2 months, he couldn't sleep without the light on. He checked every door and window before bed, a full circuit of the apartment like a security guard doing rounds. His therapist, a woman named Dr. Reese, who specialized in institutional abuse survivors, said this was normal. Control had been taken from him, so he needed to reclaim it in small ways. He wouldn't touch his model airplanes. They sat in the closet where Karen had boxed them up. I put them on his shelf one afternoon while he was at school. When he came home, he stared at them for a long time, then carefully took each one down and put them back in the box. He didn't say anything. But the next morning, I found the B-17 kit on the kitchen table, the one he'd been saving for us. He'd opened the box and laid out all the pieces but hadn't started building. He'd just left them there, like a question. So I sat down and started reading the instructions. When Tyler got home from school, I was gluing the fuselage. He watched for maybe 10 minutes. Then he sat across from me and started on the wings. We didn't talk. We just built. It took us 3 weeks to finish that B-17. We worked on it every night after dinner, sometimes for 20 minutes, sometimes for 2 hours. Tyler would narrate the historical details while he worked. Did you know the B-17 could fly with one engine knocked out? Did you know the tail gunner had the most dangerous position? Facts poured out of him like he'd been storing them up during those 6 weeks when nobody cared what he knew about airplanes. When we applied the decals, the ones I'd pulled from the trash, Tyler held the sheet up to the light and smiled for the first time in months. It was a fragile thing, that smile, like a crack in ice that could go either way, break wider, or seal back up. We hung the B-17 from his ceiling with fishing line, right next to the P-51 Mustang and the Sopwith Camel and all the others that Karen had taken down and I'd put back up. Tyler stood on his bed and adjusted the angle so the B-17 looked like it was flying through the others. A formation, he said. A year after the trial, Tyler entered a model aircraft competition at the State Fair in Palmer. He'd built a replica of the Spirit of Street Louis from scratch, not a kit. Balsa wood, tissue paper, hand-painted details. It took him 4 months. He placed second and was furious about it for exactly 1 day before he started planning next year's entry. His therapist said the competition mattered less than the fact that he'd built something fragile and let strangers judge it. That was trust. Small, careful trust, but real. I started volunteering with an organization called Safe Return that worked with families whose children had been placed in abusive residential programs. Alaska had more of them than people realized. The wilderness provided cover. The isolation prevented oversight. Parents desperate for help found these programs through polished websites and paid endorsements. By the time they realized something was wrong, their children had been transformed in ways that took years to undo, if they could be undone at all. We created a checklist for parents. Can you visit unannounced? Can your child call you anytime? Are staff members licensed and verifiable? Is the program accredited by a recognized body? Are former participants and families willing to speak openly? If the answer to any of these was no, walk away. No program that has nothing to hide restricts parental access. Tyler asked to read his story at one of our community events. He was 11 by then. He'd written it himself, 8 pages in his careful handwriting, and Dr. Reese had helped him edit it. He stood at the podium in a room of maybe 60 people, parents, social workers, a few troopers, and read the whole thing without stopping. The last part said, "Dr. Whitfield told me I was broken and that's why my dad left. But I wasn't broken. I was just a kid who missed his dad and didn't know how to say it. And my dad didn't leave me. He came back. He always comes back. The real broken thing was the place that told me nobody was coming." Trooper Reyes was in the front row. I saw her wipe her eyes, then pretend she hadn't. After the event, she found me by the coffee table. "You know what I think about sometimes?" she said. "That boy Marcus, in the stall. When we opened that door, he didn't even look up. That's what 2 days in a box does to a 12-year-old. Makes them stop expecting rescue. Your boy still expected it. That's because somewhere in all of it, he still believed you were coming. I thought about the moment Tyler heard my voice in the woodlot, how he'd looked at the man in the orange vest before he moved, how he'd almost stayed, how close he'd been to learning that nobody was coming, and how that lesson, once learned, might never be unlearned. Marcus was doing better, for the record. His grandmother had taken custody and moved him to Juneau. He was in therapy. He still didn't talk much, but he'd started playing basketball, which his grandmother said was progress because it meant he could trust teammates. Teammates meant believing that someone would pass you the ball. On the 1-year anniversary of the day I'd driven up that logging road, Tyler and I went back. I hadn't planned it, he asked. I want to see it, he said. I need to know it's different. The compound had been seized by the state and demolished. The clearing was just a clearing now. Stumps where the buildings had been. The foundation of the barn still visible under a layer of wild grass. The spruce trees at the edges had already started reclaiming the open ground, young shoots pushing up through the gravel. Tyler walked to where the barn had been. He stood there for a while. I gave him space. When he came back, his eyes were dry, but his face had that focused look he got when he was working out a complicated model. It's smaller than I remembered, he said. The whole place. It felt enormous when I was here. But it's just a clearing. Fear makes things bigger, I said. He nodded. Then he pulled something from his jacket pocket. A small model airplane, unpainted, about 4 inches long. He'd carved it from balsa wood. He set it on one of the foundation stones. What's that for? I asked. So if any kid ever comes through here and feels scared, they'll find it and know someone made it out. That there's something after this. We drove home with the windows down, even though it was cold. Tyler talked the entire way. About school, about his friend Marcus, who he emailed every week, about the model he was planning for next year's fair, about whether he could learn to actually fly planes someday. Real ones, not models. You'd need to study hard, I said. Math and science. He grinned. I already know my multiplication tables better than anyone. Had a lot of practice. I laughed. It was the first time he'd made a joke about it. Dr. Reese would later tell me that humor about trauma was one of the final stages of processing. It meant the memory had lost its teeth. Not gone, never gone, but defanged. In the rearview mirror, I could see the mountains disappearing behind us. Somewhere in those mountains, 23 boys had lost months of their childhood to a man who sold their labor and called it healing. Somewhere in those mountains, my son had been told his father didn't want him, and he'd almost believed it. But he hadn't, not all the way. Some stubborn piece of Tyler, the piece that built model airplanes with 200 parts and memorized aviation history for fun, had held on, had waited, had believed, against evidence, against everything adults told him, that someone was coming. I got lucky. A cracked hull on a crab boat brought me home 11 days early. If that boat hadn't taken on water, I'd have finished the season and come home to a boy who'd spent 12 weeks learning that his father's love was a lie. By then, the damage might have been permanent. Not every parent gets that stroke of luck. Not every child gets pulled out in time. That's why the checklist matters. That's why asking questions matters. That's why you never, ever stop listening to the voice in your gut that says something is wrong, even when smart people with degrees and websites and clean offices tell you everything is fine. Because the ones who hurt children don't look like monsters. They look like helpers. They use words like therapy and accountability and growth. They build websites with stock photos of smiling kids. They present solutions to the exact problems you're desperate to solve. And they count on your exhaustion, your guilt, your hope, to keep you from asking the one question that could save your child. Can I see my kid right now? With no notice, no appointment, no restrictions. If the answer is anything other than yes, take your child and run. 2 years later, Tyler was 12. He'd grown 4 inches and gained back every pound. He was building a scale model of a Boeing 737 that took up half the kitchen table, and I had to eat dinner working around the wing assembly, which I did without complaint. His room was a mess of balsa shavings and paint bottles and aviation magazines, and I didn't make him clean it because a messy room meant a kid who felt safe enough to spread out. He still checked the doors at night sometimes. He still flinched if someone raised their voice unexpectedly. But he laughed more than he flinched, and that ratio kept getting better. One evening, while we were working on the 737 cockpit, Tyler looked up from the tiny instrument panel he was painting and said, "Dad, when you came to get me, were you scared?" "Terrified," I said. "But you didn't leave." "No, even when they said you'd get arrested." "Even then?" He went back to painting. Small, precise strokes. A steady hand. That's the thing about planes, he said after a while. The whole point is, they leave the ground. Everything says they shouldn't fly. They're heavy, they're metal, the air is pushing against them. But they go up anyway. Because the design is right. He held up the tiny cockpit piece, inspecting it in the light. People are like that too, I think. We're not supposed to get through stuff like what happened. But we do. Because something in the design is right. I didn't say anything. I just watched my son paint an instrument panel the size of a thumbnail, tongue between his teeth, completely absorbed, completely safe, completely himself. And I thought about a cracked hull on a crab boat in the Bering Sea, and how the smallest fracture in the right place can let the light in, and how I would spend every remaining day of my life making sure the light stayed.